Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. My name is Carey Nieuwhof, and my goal is to help you lead like never before. So what I do every week is I sit down with world-class leaders and church leaders, business leaders, and I talk to them about what made them who they are and try to have the conversation with them that you would have if you got to sit down for lunch with them or have dinner with them or really got to spend some time with them. So we go into the backstory and we explore what made them who they are and some of the principles they've learned along the way. So if you enjoy this episode, I would love for you to like it, to subscribe, and also to share it with your friends. And in the meantime, here's today's episode. Levi, welcome back to the podcast. It's so great to have you.
Carey, thanks for having me.
So I want to start because I love asking leaders this question, not because I love what's happening, but because I love to see how different people respond. But I'd love to know how the crisis, here we are in month 4, really rolling over to month 4 as we record this. It'll air later. How it's impacted you, your family, and how it's impacted Fresh Life Church.
Yeah, wow. Gosh. What's funny is when we first started hearing glimmers of it, I was, first it was all it was all in China, this Chinese things, Chinese, virus, and you're hearing about it. And I remember seeing a clip of I don't know if it was manufactured or not, of drones going around China, dumping out antiseptic on streets, and what in the heck? It just seemed like it was
movie, right? Yeah.
It was like, what is this? What is even happening? And then it started becoming more and more and more. And when it finally really started getting crazy, I was headed to Seattle, and it was really starting to show up in Seattle and some of the retirement homes. And I was literally flying there that weekend for a church commitment. And I got some counsel from some friends, and they're like, look, I don't recommend you bail on a church that's booked you and promoted you coming, but at least call the senior pastor and see if he'd be willing to, I understand if you want to postpone my coming. So I did that. I called him, said, hey, I'd understand if you wanted to have me later. He's like, no, we're moving forward with the service, So I was like, okay, so let your yes be yes. So I got on the plane, and it was really an unsettled feeling on the plane, flying to the mouth of the beast, Seattle. And so woke up the next morning. Seattle has prohibited any gatherings over 250 overnight. So it was like I was the last person to preach. Still, I'm the last person to preach at that church. They haven't reopened yet. Then I flew that Wednesday to Chicago. I had to speak in Chicago that Wednesday. And same exact thing happened, except this time, while I was speaking, the mayor, during my message, said no gatherings over 50 or whatever it was. So I'm still the last person to have preached in that church live.
Wow.
And then I came home, and Montana still hadn't shut down because we're late to the game. We're socially distanced by way of life. So I preached at our church that Sunday, and I'm the last person to preach at my church. So in that season, I was kind of just zipping under the wire in all 3 instances. And now
Levi Lusko shut down America. Now we know.
I was just going to say it. I know I may have been single-handedly the responsible party for spreading the coronavirus around the country, but I will say this: I haven't been on a plane since that flight home from Chicago, and that was back in March. So it's the longest gap in 15 years with no air travel, which is so strange.
What is that like? Because I'm the same way. I flew back from Atlanta March 10th. The day, and the next day, the dominoes all started falling, and that was it. That was my last flight. I was supposed to.
Have you traveled since? No?
No.
Yeah, it's been a weird thing. You see, I'll see my suitcase, and come across it in the spare bedroom closet and be like, what in the world? What is happening? But at the same time, I've been playing so much more tennis. I've been, biking a lot. I've been so much more, doing things that are that you're hard pressed to do when you're always going.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, Carey, though, it's been also a weird thing because I've also had to deal with an incredible amount of adrenaline in my system that normally I would be using. There's an adrenaline rush to an airplane takeoff and landing. There is excitement, in going into an engagement, speaking to a crowd, going into a hotel room. There's dopamine and all that. So, I felt like I was in sort of like an adrenaline withdrawal, and I found it in my system, but needing to go somewhere.
So what'd you do with that?
I had more counseling appointments than normal. I legitimately did. I mean, I'm not joking. I booked multiple times. I just needed to process it because I found myself, I didn't love what came out. I didn't love what came out in my own heart, my spirit, in the way I was handling that stress. And so I made it a rule for 30 days. I took a walk every day, regardless of the weather. There was one day where it was sub-zero, and blowing wind. But I took my son, my 2.5-year-old son, so my wife could have a break. He's 3 now that this is airing in August. But, I put a windshield over the stroller. We have this like plexi, windshield thing that can go over the stroller. And I went out and I found that the long walks with no cell phone were incredibly restorative to me. I journaled more. And I think this has exposed idols that I didn't even realize were idols inside.
I was going to say, what is underneath that? Yeah, because if you don't mind going there, because we're all learning stuff about ourselves. And
I think there's a lot of narcissism, obviously, in all of our hearts. I think for me too, it's just I like the intensity and I like the war mode. I like I thrive on that, the exhilaration and rush of that next thing, and I think to some degree, there's been an amount of, he makes me to lie down in green pastures that I've been having to walk through.
Wow. And it must be, strange for you because the rush of Sunday has changed too, right? Gathering. You're still preaching, you're still communicating, but you don't have the rush of Sunday either. The pressure of Sunday or the rush of Sunday. Has that impacted you in some ways? That didn't go anywhere because for me, that pressure of writing that sermon, that intensity, it builds up. My joke is, as a preacher, you have a baby on Sunday, you have to get pregnant on Monday, and no one wants to get pregnant the day after they had a baby. But that's how Mondays feel sometimes, right? You're having to recreate again life in this essence in your womb of a message of something you're wanting to deliver, right? They literally call the sermon delivery. Yeah, that's a great analogy.
I don't want to get pregnant, but that's what studying is for me on Monday. And, I still have found the intensity of that blinking red light, the tag light on the camera and the YouTube comments. I found that to be still very, very, very meaningful and very exciting. I've definitely had to pivot, but we started capturing messages. We had one advantage in the whole thing, and that was that when we planted Fresh Life, I was in series, but getting invitations to speak, and I talked to one of our board members about it, and he actually said, why do you want to do guest speakers so often? It interrupts the flow of a series. He goes, why don't you just go into the building when it's empty and record the sermon? And then when you're gone, you could just play that video. And this was before we were multi-site. This was before I knew of anybody else doing it. I'm sure Craig Rochelle or Andy Stanley or somebody was doing it, but this would have been, 2009, early in 2009. And I was like, that's an interesting idea. So maybe it'll work. So I went into the theater and it was like 9:00 at night, had the video guy and the sound guy in there. And I just preached my message, explained to the church what I was doing. I said, hey, I got asked to speak of this thing. So I'm recording this message on a Thursday night at 9. You're listening to it on a Sunday, but I said, but it's based on God's word, which was written 2,000 years ago. So let's see how this works. People got saved. Some people didn't like it. Some people did. And it really taught us we could use this tool of video in a unique way. So I've been doing it for a long time. So that to me was kind of old hat.
Yeah. What, how's this been for your family to have you home that much? What are you learning about that?
I think my wife would say I've been home a little too much. I think we were joking that, we had to find a new rhythm because absence makes the heart grow fonder. And we had kind of relied on that. I think it caused us to, you can get a little bit, that when you were a kid and you would do a sleepover at your friend's house and then he would sleep at yours. And then the third night you would be in a fist fight.
Uh-huh.
There can be to some extent that in a marriage because Jenny and I, we worked together, we lived together. So I think we had to find a way through it that wasn't, I'm not leaving, and you know what I mean? And neither was she.
Yeah. And then were your kids in school or were they homeschooled or how did that work?
So a combination. So my oldest daughter is in school. She is starting as a freshman next year and she's going out for the tennis team, really excited. But she was heartbroken. She is an extrovert, needs people, craves people, and it was driving her crazy to be home. And then my 2 daughters are homeschooled, and life didn't change very much for them.
Yeah, I've talked to so many parents, and our kids are in their 20s now, but so many parents whose kids, particularly daughters, are just hating it because they miss their friends. They love their parents and being home, but they really, really miss their friends. So anything else about just the personal disruption that this has wrought? Anything that you are learning? Anything that you would say, no, this is something I'm really paying attention to right now?
The biggest thing I'm learning, Carey, right now is just is that power of deactivating your normal tendencies. So, like I said, I love that war drum. I love that beat of and I've really been learning a lot lately about how to turn that off. And my counselor made a reference to me. She said it as a joke, but I took it as oh gosh, that's a real assignment I'll have to really pray to do. She said, you should make waffles and not follow the mix on the back of the box, not follow the rules. Because to me, that's, it's easy to approach even a vacation or a family day with military precision and forethought and planning and intentionality because of that. That's just how I thrive. And she's like, you need to the next time you make waffles, not follow the recipe. Just let the kids throw what they want to throw in there, and it's that to me is I'm learning the power of that. So, even just like yesterday, just sitting in the moment, not thinking about what time it is, not thinking about the day ahead of me, not thinking about things I want to get done, or not even reveling in the productivity of the day's work. Because how I'm wired, I can't really feel good about myself without a sense of accomplishment, but that's not healthy. And so when your self-image is attached to your productivity, because to me, productivity might as well be called heroin, I feel like if I got some stuff done, I feel good about myself. And if I didn't, I don't. And so learning to expose that as idolatry and lean into my identity as a son of the king, and then from there, let that work flow out is a healthy thing for me.
You sound like a planner. You sound like an organizer. You sound like you had everything mapped out. You were busy all the time. And you were just kind of moving from this to that, to this to that. Is that fair characterization?
Yeah, it's very hard for me to not see off into the future, the next thing.
Yep.
And so, the tour, we had a tour, 13 city bus tour that got rescheduled. The speaking engagements, the vacation, all those things, that's how I am. And on an unhealthy, when I'm unhealthy, those things, I build them up in my mind, especially the day off, the trip away. And so, that's definitely what you said is fair to say.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I've spent some time with Henry Cloud. He's going to be on the show this summer, or has been on the show, depending on when everything airs. And he was just talking about, the huge change of pace for all of us. And one of the things he talked about, and this is something I learned after I burned out because I could not sit still in my 30s. And then God made me sit still. I'm like, okay, that's what burnout does, right? And learning the contemplative life. He mentioned Tony Blair, who, when he was Prime Minister of England, would find a pond and sit there for half a day. And Warren Buffett's made it a discipline for 7-8 decades to stare out of the window for an hour and a half every day. It sounds like you're doing a little bit more of that, some contemplative, some quiet stuff. Anything you can share from what you're learning in those moments?
Yes. I would echo everything you're saying. I've never stared out of a window in my entire life. So that is incredibly challenging. But I think I learned if I don't take those walks without my phone, even just like little tiny tweaks. So like when I wake up, I go downstairs every morning and I light a fire and I make a pot of coffee and I have my journal, my book, my Bible, my devotional. And then after that, I have 2 books that I'm reading. Like right now, it's a book on Roosevelt and a book that my staff and I are going to be going through this summer. We're doing a Zoom every week. We normally would have a big advance where everyone comes in, but instead we're doing a book club where we're going to read through and talk through a book every week together as a team.
Wow.
So I'm working through that. So anyhow, if I leave my phone upstairs in the room where it woke me up, as an alarm, and don't touch it until after that hour of, time with the Holy Spirit, and then an hour of reading, and then I go upstairs, get it, and I put a podcast on when I make my breakfast. That to me is an incredibly, that is all the difference in the day going with me at my best and at my worst. So I've not touched Instagram. I've not been on email. I've not, read a text message. And the only time I violate it, I always regret it. So for example, I preached on racism this last Sunday. Obviously, at this moment, we're going through so much with protesting and riots, and it's all that conversation on race. And I gave a message, talked about what in my mind, white privilege is, and how I found it in the Bible in Esther. Esther has position, you have privilege. Esther, it's not bad that you have it. And I think a lot of people are very defensive about privilege, like, oh, I don't have it, or you're trying, as though someone were trying to take it away from me. But Mordecai wasn't trying to take away Esther's privilege. He was trying to tell her to leverage it for the other people in her life who didn't have it. And so I gave a sermon to our church, and I just said, hey, look, whether I view myself as a Caucasian white pastor, someone with privilege, but that's not bad. That means I need to use that privilege for the oppressed and those who don't have that. And, the next morning, I violated my own rule. I grabbed my phone, and while I was getting my coffee ready, I flipped open to my emails. Little nagging voice said, what are you doing? But it's like those things we ignore to our detriment. First email, guy in our church who has been a part of our church for a long time. I'm disappointed in you as the subject. And then he went on to tell me why he was leaving the church over this particular message. And it's so funny how that, of course, was the thing that brought me into that tailspin emotionally. So I find if I'm able to let God's voice be the first voice I listen to, I'm just a better version of myself for the day.
Thanks for sharing so deeply and so personally. I think you're reading a lot of people's mail right now. And I just appreciate the fact, because so often, Levi, in stories, it's like, well, I had this tough season, but that was years ago, and now I'm great. And I just think it's great to be able to go together with you in real time through this. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I'd love to know go ahead.
Well, no, I did. I think I relate to other people who are honest about their dysfunction. Not to glorify that. I think it can be the other side of it, where it's like too much of a big deal.
Look at what a mess I am.
Yeah. Or even like, I don't know, sort of like if you aren't struggling, you're not somehow good. There are seasons where we're great, and I think to be real about that too is important. Times of blessing, times of there's times when you just feel wonderful and you're doing good. And I think we should be able to celebrate that too, mountaintops and valleys. But I think to the extent that we're willing to be real about the hardships we're facing, people will relate to us more.
Love to switch gears a little bit and talk to you about that moment when you realized you couldn't meet at your church and your locations, and you have many locations, you're in 4 states. What was your first reaction when you knew you weren't going to be able to meet physically at your locations?
I went through a range, a spectrum. I went through the hell we aren't, like my mind flashed to the book of Acts, whether it's right to listen to you or not, I don't know. So I was there, and then I was, well, hold on a second, what kind of a witness would that be? And, I went through a lot of different things. I was in an airport, of course, when I first was told this might be coming. I was in the Denver airport, and it was Portland. Our church in Portland was the first to be told they couldn't meet. And then they all quickly followed suit. But when that first came, I was like, this can't be real. This is so surreal. But then I was like, I almost felt like a great sense of well, we've been in training for this, but didn't know it. Thank God for what we have. But I guess then I kind of quickly went, what about the church? That I thought about church plants right away too. So we made it a priority within the first 2 Sundays to find a church plant that maybe didn't have infrastructure systems, was portable, and we covered a couple months of their expenses so that they could use whatever money they needed to buy some video cameras or whatever. So I guess I kind of was all over the place.
Wow. So you were kind of all over the place. What, and you're right. I mean, you were probably positioned, you had a strong church, a large ministry, you had budget. probably a little bit of money in the bank and that kind of thing. What has the impact to date? Because as we're recording this, you're still not open in your physical locations. Do you have the option to be open and you just chose not to be, or how is that working? I know it's complicated with 4 states and multiple jurisdictions.
Sure. Well, every state's different. We don't think there will be any gatherings in Oregon anytime this summer. It looks like it'll be fall before there's anything that we're able to do in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. They are, because there's such a small sheltered community, taking it very seriously. So there's been more restrictions in Jackson than even in the greater state of Wyoming. Montana is, as the time of we're recording this, in phase 2. We could have church with social distancing. We could have church with a limited percentage of people in the building, all those masks and 6 foot distance and even ushering people to their seats. Otherwise, the risk, of course, is that someone would get it and you get a lawsuit and be liable because you didn't respond to the CDC recommendations. So at this point, we've just said, like, we're not going to do it until there's not restrictions. You know, I'm comfortable with us staying. And right now we're doing watch parties in Montana. Up to 50 people can be in a space. And people are liking that. We call it church online together. So if you want to watch church with 49 other people, you get I don't preach it live, but it's still video, but you're doing it with other human beings. I don't think there's an urgency to get back. I mean, I think what I told our church was business is rushing and scrambling to get open. Why? Because business is broken. That gym is going to go out of business for good if they don't get open. So they have to. I said the church can't be broken. So we can serve our city by being reluctant to rush in and let people's visits out be either to go buy a car or go to a spa or whatever and spend some money in a business that's going to potentially go under without that. And we can continue to meet online and thrive and be the church we were born to be.
What kind of reaction has, or I guess results have you seen online? Because you had metrics before. You had church online before. You would podcast your messages, et cetera, et cetera. Have you seen a spike? Was it flat? Just tell us a little bit of the narrative.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely impacting more people online than we would have than we were before this, and more people are watching online than would have been in a physical location. That being said, I think the reality is what the first week and the second week numbers have been gradually declining all throughout this pandemic. And that is everybody I talk to, with a few exceptions. There's a few that, Elevation and, Transformation Church that are just on a different level. They're like,
exactly,
Joe Rogan podcast practically. They're just ridiculous. But we have seen engagement wane. Now, that normally happens every summer for us anyway. As the weather gets bright and warm, fewer people watch and fewer people are in seats than would be normally because they're out kayaking or whatever. But at the same time, I do see that the novelty and the, at first this is a shiny new object. It has been settled.
Has it settled to the level where it's lower than it would have been, say, a year ago in the summer, or are you just thinking it's normal seasonal attrition, or do you have any theories on that?
Well, we're way above what year over year would be, but not pre-COVID first couple weeks.
So you're already up year over year. You're probably up to over where you were pre-COVID. But it's just not quite the heights that you had in those first few weeks. But I think that's what crisis does, right? I'm sure the news ratings aren't what they were in that first week of global shutdown either, right?
Sure. The churches after 9/11, right? I mean, all those analogies of everyone's, spirituality, becoming a fever pitch and then eventually, just settling back down to normal.
I'm kind of glad we're having this conversation before you're exercising the option to reopen, because I would love to capture this moment in time to think about what your factors or criteria will be when you decide to reopen. You kind of hinted at it earlier, but could you drill down on that a little bit? Like what will need to be true for you to say, great, church is back on in person?
Yeah, well, I mean, I consider what we're doing now with our 50-person watch parties, that are all over the state of Montana. I consider that to be open.
Yeah,
I mean, if you're with 49 people and you're watching church, you're worshiping. I feel like that is powerful. And I feel like that to me gives us a toe in the waters, comfort level. But for whatever reason, I just felt like I don't want to see church with restrictions. I don't want to see our gatherings with masks. And maybe my song will change if this drags on for 8 months, and maybe we will have to develop that as a society. I guess I just would rather have, when people return to our theaters and our actual gatherings, that they are not going to involve memories of caution tape over rows. I made the decision when I went to Qdoba. When Qdoba finally opened and I walked in, they had the crime scene tape over every other table. And I just looked around and thought, I don't like this. I don't want to be in here. I'll take my food to go and eat it at home or eat it on a bench on a park. To sit in a room, I'm sitting at a table, but the table next to me's got the yellow caution tape over it. I just was like, I don't want that to be a taste people have in their mouths.
Isn't that interesting? I don't want to read too much into this, but you and I talked about flying. I've talked to a lot of my friends about flying. And, I've got people who definitely want me to jump on a plane. I can't right now because our border's still locked down. But I have the same thought process in my mind when it comes to airplanes. And I'm like top tier status at Air Canada. But I'm like, I don't want to get on if every other seat is empty and if everyone has to wear masks and if like my water is handed to me in a bottle and my food is in a box and, you have to get a temperature scan before you get on, which I understand may be here to stay. But there's something in my psychology that says I'd rather stay home than fly under those conditions. And I don't know what that is. That might be like 3 counseling appointments away from figuring out what that is. But I think you're articulating something.
That's really funny.
That is somehow in the ether, because even churches that are reopening, at least in these early days, are discovering that their numbers are shockingly low when they reopen. This imagined like rush back to church in the auditorium. Any thoughts on like a drill down on that people kind of want like church as they knew it, as opposed to these abysmally low numbers that we're seeing in these early days of reopening?
Yeah, I don't know. I think what would I want? Would I want to come in with a mask on and, be told you may now go into the bathroom because there are half as many people as there are sinks in there? I feel like I would almost rather the experience online with your kids, watching a kid's YouTube video after the regular worship service. Like, I feel like that at least, and then inviting friends over. Like, part of it too is I think I don't want to fight a battle I can't win. And if I open up a service that I don't know, if there's a level of mystery, I would just rather have it be.
I hear you.
I don't know. I just feel like it's in my gut. How do you feel about it?
I tend to agree. I've seen some of the pictures online of like super socially distanced worship. And listen, there are leaders I respect who are reopening at the first opportunity. So I'm not saying this is black and white or right and wrong at all. But I am saying I'm kind of with you on that one. It's like not wanting to fly until at least it's not as weird as it appears to be right now. And this is someone who's flown.
And of course, no matter what decision you make, you get, you take shots from both sides, And it's interesting, of course, to see 10,000 people in a protest, but then it's like, no, we can't get 500 people in a room for church.
And I think too, you have the luxury, and we would have that luxury too, of the sky is not falling. I assume your givings are decent. You've got more people than you've ever had before. They're connecting. What are some things, let's start here. How have you changed your services, or have you changed them at all with the reality of online only and then these watch parties, which are physically distanced gatherings of 50 people or less?
No, so those aren't physically distanced.
Oh,
50 can be
like arm
that's
in
why
arm.
we started doing them. In Montana, right now, 50 people with no socially distanced. You don't have to wear a mask. You don't have to keep 6 feet away. So they're hugging, they're knuckle bumping. We have sanitizer out and stuff like that.
Okay.
But if it's 50, there's not rules on it.
But have you made changes in your service format? That was why we made that foray into that.
No. Not really. I mean, we developed a more robust pre-show so that people who jump on earlier were able to pull in viewers into the Skypes or, check in with small groups. And, so that's been really fun. That's been more robust. And then I've done the giving more often. I don't normally lead the giving, but I feel like a connection from my wife and I to those who are partnering with us in the ministry. I feel like maybe that's been with a little more intentionality. That might be out of fear, which, founded or not, is a real thing. Like the need to let me get me in front of the givers. Let me make sure I'm sharing my heart with them. Those instincts aren't always right, though. It's funny. You think so. Then now we've eased that up. Even I haven't done I did the offering for several weeks in a row, but now we're utilizing our other pastors on staff and other team members to do that more often. Although it's funny that they'll come to me like, "Hey, we think you should do the giving this weekend." It's like even that. I'm like, that's because I kind of probably put that in place. That they saw that knee-jerk reaction to do it in critical moments. So then that's even how they're coming to me with. So having to retrain some of those things that I've allowed and, cast new vision.
That's cool. What are your staff doing these days? What have you got them redeployed to doing?
Well, our central staff hasn't skipped a beat. I mean, as a church with local staffs in the churches and then a central team, I think so much fell on the central team right away, especially the audio, video, creative. Those roles became more important than ever. They're like defying. Well, we didn't ever have to defy because we're allowed to send the broadcasting team in and stuff like that. But the real dilemma was to try and stop ourselves from unnecessarily creating busy work for the local staffs. We almost even just kind of were like, hey, look, we'd rather you be more rested when life does pick back up than, rearrange these baubles and then tear them out and rearrange them again. Like almost like we need you to feel busy. It would almost be better for them to lean into a restful season somewhat than to be frenetically, just doing something out of a twitchy need to just be busy.
That's good. I haven't heard that answer. That's a really refreshing response. What about online engagement? As you've attracted more and more people, how have you tracked with them? Have you gotten to know anybody? What are you doing to encourage engagement over just, say, viewing or casual observing?
Yeah. Well, in response to your comment about you haven't heard that before, that came the hard way. We were talking to a couple that we bumped into. I don't even know how. My wife and I did. And they said, man, our campus pastor checked in with us like 9 times last week, and I think...
Leave me alone.
They were almost saying like, we're good,
changed,
we're okay.
Right?
Yeah. And so I told that story on a staff meeting jokingly and just said something like, yes, we want to be checking in with the people, but at the same time, I don't want you to feel a pressure that if you're not always doing something, your job's on the line. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, that's not how we're thinking. When a football team has an athlete on the bench for a while, they're still part of the team. They'll come back in eventually. So they're chat hosting and doing that sort of thing, and they were coming up with ideas and different things like that. But in my mind, it wasn't like, I wanted them to know. In my mind, it wasn't like out of sight, out of mind, or because your role right now isn't one that is even not unnecessary, but the kicker's not wasting space on the bench just because he's not kicking. You get called in eventually. I wanted everyone to have that breath of exhale. But in response to your second question, we shifted our church assimilation class to we wanted to. We talked forever about an online version of it, but this was okay. Let's scramble, and so we created an online module where you could go through our church membership and all of that and begin serving. And so that's something we wanted to do forever, but we had the impetus to really figure it out now. And so that's been amazing to be able to put people through it and even figure out what it looks like to be a part of it when you don't live anywhere near geographically where our church is at. So we'll have someone go through it in Pennsylvania, and now they start serving, and they're an online host serving, giving. They're a part of our church. They've signed the charter, that whatever our document is, the code of conduct, and they're a part of our church now, but they don't live anywhere near where we do.
That's amazing. That's what one of my theories is, that there's what I call market consolidation, or economists call market consolidation happening, where, again, your church based in the Midwest or the West Coast, is now got people who actively affiliate, but they're in Pennsylvania. Any sense that may be what's happening to some of your online audience, like it's non-geographic specific, and that there's consolidation where churches or Christians are moving allegiances to new congregations, new pastors? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a lot of mixed thoughts, Carey. This is what wakes me up at 2 a.m. I have a fear of it a lot, and I think that's probably why we didn't do it, for years, because of just the risk of celebrating transfer growth and being and patting ourselves on the back because someone ditched a local expression of the body of Christ to watch our online broadcast, and maybe they're not going to give the level of discipleship and having authority in their lives that they would need to really become a meaningful part of the body of Christ. I'm concerned about someone who is maybe just wanting to buck authority, or maybe they were in a situation where they were, unkind to their spouse or whatever, and the pastor maybe said something, and so now it's like, well, we're not going to use church anymore, and so they watch out Fresh Life Online. Like, I think about these things and I'm concerned about them, but what I have seen in, I guess I can't let fear keep me from moving forward in faith. I have the faith of, if someone is a part and is serving, I can't keep that from happening even in our churches. There are some people who even in physical churches who are unwilling to yield to authority. So I have a lot of conflicted emotions when I think about the bigger picture. I was talking about this in January. I gave a talk at Passion 2020, and I talked about part of my concern of church online is to be shallowly going to lots of churches, but you can change the channel anytime the preacher says something that steps on your toes. And what that Pandora's box is going to look like down the road. And I compared it to the Dust Bowl that swept through the country. And, so then this now is like that on an entirely different level. But of course, there was always that risk. And there is also the opportunity for there to be genuine life change, genuine, your heart resonates with a ministry's heartbeat, and you get to be a meaningful part of it regardless of where in the country or world you live.
I think that's a tension we're in right now, and that's a great articulation of it, Levi. And I know lots of people, because I read the comments on my platform and other platforms all the time, who would say, and that's exactly the problem with what you're doing, right? You're online, you're consolidating all these people who, you're right, can change the channel the moment you say something that they don't like. On the and on the one hand, they're right. On the other hand, it's happening. So what do? Right? Like, you're not going to stop the internet. You're not going to stop church online, and you're not going to stop the future from getting here. And in some ways, I think our theology and our ecclesiology has to catch up with what's actually happening. And I think that's a really good articulation of it.
Well, what gave me kind of peace to move forward with declaring someone who's online attending a part of our church was that parable about the angel's job of separating the sheep from the goats at the end of the age. And that if we try and do it now, you'll rip up the wheat with the weeds. That's God's job. And I it's so funny that I have to learn this lesson so often, but an incredible sense of peace comes from the remembering that God is God and we're not. And anytime I'm trying to control something, or I don't understand, I can't mitigate the risk, therefore I'm leery to move forward. It's like God's like, hey, tap, tap, tap. Remember this thing called sovereignty? And the moment I begin to need to control, I'm ignoring him. And so that's given me great peace.
Would love you mentioned volunteering a couple times. So I sign on with Fresh Life Church, and I commit to volunteering. And right now you only have digital options and watch parties. What does that look like in a digital church? So I become a permanent digital attender of Fresh Life Church from Pennsylvania, from Toronto, wherever. What does volunteering look like in that reality?
Well, one of the biggest things that we care about is the revitalization of the city that you live in. And so in Nehemiah, every worker was called to work at the part of the wall that was in front of his own house. So we place a great emphasis on the idea of serving within your community. So for example, next week, we're mailing out shirts. Every year we send a new shirt out. That's a shirt you wear when you're doing, community service. And we have this old-fashioned crazy belief that community service is not punishment, but it's actually a privilege. It's an honor. I know judges can assign it like, oh, you've been bad, you have to do community service. But it's like, no, hold on a second. The church should be at the front of serving communities. And the book of Jeremiah says, in the peace of the city that you live in, you will have peace. So this started for us in 2010. I went to the mayor. We were then one church. We were two churches then. I went to the mayor of the city that we broadcast from and just said, we have several thousand people attending this church. How can we help? What's in your heart? What do you not have budget for that you want to do? And she gave us some things and we picked those off that summer. And we were like, oh, we could do this more. And then we started giving out outreach grants and, we quickly, it grew and scaled. And so, now we've given out millions of dollars and thousands upon thousands of man hours. And so if you serve in Philadelphia, not only are you able to be an online greeter and, be in Zoom small groups through the week, but we are going to give you the tools and the challenge to get out to the Parks and Rec department, to do blood drives, to actually be serving as the church in the city so that the place that we live in might become a more beautiful and a healthy place.
I love that vision. And you know what? In the same way that multi-site scales to different cities and different states, like you and many other pastors have, theoretically, what's the difference between Portland and Philadelphia, right? Just a couple thousand miles. That's all, right? That's about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to think about, but right now the paradigm is changing. We were one church in 13 locations. And now, we're at this moment, we're one church in 3,000 or I don't even know how many locations we would be in, across the continental United States and then around the world. But the same things apply. And it's caused us to go, okay, this ongoing sanctification, this growth and maturing and even challenging in people's lives as needed, it can work on the internet when it had to. So can it continue to work when it doesn't have to?
Love to run this hypothetical by you. Let's just say it's not happening anytime soon, but all the virus is cured. Everything goes back to normal to the point where we can gather as many people as we want. Air traffic's normal. People are back in restaurants, the whole deal. The fear of the virus is gone. And you just reopen Fresh Life Church across all locations. What will be different moving forward? Like, do you think that this has permanently changed the way you see or approach ministry? Is there anything you will do differently than you were doing pre-COVID?
I would think we will never approach things the same way again. I think, honestly, out of the scope and scale of all that we're doing, I think that the in-person gatherings in our minds will be somewhat like the traditional service that many churches used to offer. This is our services. And for those who like the old school, we have a traditional service. Now, I'm not belittling our 13 churches that have worship experiences in buildings and all of that, but I very much see it as that is going to be a component of a much larger vision. I feel like God is opening our eyes to see the blue ocean of opportunity of seeing, regardless of where you live, you can be a part of it, you can be resourced, you can be equipped, and you can be sent. That happening on such a grand scale that the 13 locations we had going into this with we have a church online also, is almost now like we have a church online and we have some brick and mortar locations. I definitely feel like it's caused me to look at everything in a completely backwards fashion.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a wonderful articulation, because I've talked a lot about church online. I get beat up. It's like, well, the church is going to gather. But to me, it almost feels, and I've used this analogy at Connexus Church with some of our leaders, it feels to me like if you've ever been to a taping of The Tonight Show or something like that, it's like, that's something that millions of people watch, but there's only 400 people in the audience. And I almost wonder if that's what the church of the future will be like, that there's a studio audience or a studio congregation, so to speak, that's gathered, but most of the people will be intermittently attending physical gatherings, and a lot will just simply be online. Any other thoughts on that might help inform how you're seeing the future?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's an interesting way to look at it. I mean, I guess the Tonight Show, people are consuming, where so long as leaders, our perspective is the equipping, right? That's always been our job, the equipping of the saints to do the ministry.
Yeah, it's a major difference.
But the scale of it is what you're talking about. And I think
I'm
that's
talking
where
about
we need to be
400
thinking.
people in the room and 1 million people watching, or whatever that would be, as opposed to we're thinking, like you said, everybody has to be in the room and then there's a few people watching, which actually wasn't true pre-COVID. Like, I'm sure your online audience was already bigger than your in-person audience pre-COVID, was it? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, for sure. For sure. To a multiple, when you add in, you'd have 30,000 people listening a week just on Spotify pre-COVID. You know what I mean? So like when you have, there's hardly that many people in the state of Montana. You know what I'm saying? But joking. But I definitely thought of our online ministry as an important but auxiliary component of what we were doing. Whereas now I see it as being the thing we are doing, and the physical gathering is a component of it. Yeah. I think God has been more and more bringing me to that place.
No, I think that's great. It's almost like the church has become a digital default church, that is now our starting point. Do you think that'll impact your staffing long term? How you staff the church?
No doubt. I mean, I never want to make any absolute thing, but I do see, I wonder if we will continue opening brick and mortar locations. That is, I'm trying to envision, when we could have 30 watch parties in a city, why we would want to go in and build another one. Like, I just don't know. I mean, maybe it'll all, in 2 years from now, we'll be like, oh, can you believe we ever thought that? But at this point right now, just the scalability, the flexibility, and the way that in a group size of 30 or 100 or whatever people really can know each other to a large degree, be even held accountable better than in a 2,000 person, environment.
It is really interesting, when you think about it, because it'd be tempting to look at the watch parties as a Band-Aid strategy until you can get to a building again. But what if that became a permanent expression of just the way that people were gathering? It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, look, isn't the largest church on earth kind of structured that way? I mean, isn't that Korean church, the 1 million person church, isn't it kind of more, they only come together in like for very special occasions in large groups, and for the rest of the time they're in these house churches? I mean, it's kind of exciting to think about what that could look like. When you add in the digital component,
it scales, and you don't have nearly the costs associated with it, right? Because you look at, and I think your context, because when you've been on the show before and we've connected, we talked about that, right? Like, you don't have multi-thousand seat places. You're going into small towns, smaller communities, smaller venues, but it still costs you hundreds of thousands or sometimes millions of dollars to open up a location. Whereas you could put $100,000 into a few watch parties, and well, I don't even know what you do with that kind of money in a few watch parties, but like, you know what I'm saying? It just scales at a much bigger level if you could start to think about the paradigm differently.
No doubt. I mean, you're talking about criminal background checks. You're talking about muffins. I mean, at the end of the day, what your really cost is, and then staff to resource and equip and be shepherding, and you'd have cluster pastors. I think it's very exciting, and then that global vision rolls out on a much bigger scale potentially than had you been thinking only in terms of what you could do in a city. I don't think it'll ever replace that, and I think whether it's coming together monthly or whatever, I still think there's something very special that the Holy Spirit blesses about gatherings. But I do think that it changes, the limiting factors maybe have been removed.
Anything else about the future church, Levi, that you're thinking about? Knowing that all of our thinking's in pencil, it's very wet cement right now, but anything else you're thinking about the future church or the future of your church?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, I wonder, what this is going to do. I mean, we've been seeing such a migration towards cities, people leaving rural, people leaving small town to get to cities. And I just wonder right now, I mean, we found out what happens when you live 30 bodies deep, stacked 100 stories tall in a building, and I wonder if we're not going to see, I know we're for sure seeing in Montana an incredible, I was having dinner, a socially distant dinner with some people. And I sat next to a realtor and I was like, hey, has this been a good break for you? He goes, a bit break. It's been the busiest I've ever worked in my entire life. And I go, what do you mean? People buy new homes. It's economically not seemingly to be a time when people are wanting to do it. He goes, Atlanta, Dallas, LA, he rattled off and he goes, that was today. I showed houses to people, and so there's a lot of people, I think, wanting to move to Colorado, I think the appeal of middle America is definitely going to be post-COVID, something that people are going to be thinking about. Now that you can work remotely, why not?
I've talked to a number of CEOs who have basically left the major cities, and they and their teams are now, in some rural community that barely has internet, and they're like, actually, this works. Like they're shocked. So I wonder if that's really going to change the game for a lot of urban churches, but also for the rural ones. Like we kind of live, I say Toronto because no one knows where we live, but like we live kind of in the middle of nowhere. And you already saw a little bit of a flight out of the city. But if the commute's gone and the internet's good, you may have solved a major problem.
Yeah. And I think, we've always kind of, Fresh Life has defied somewhat those, sort of statistics on the idea of a large church springing up in a very small city. On our biggest Sunday we ever had, we had, 1 out of 20 people in the city in church in person. And that's incredible.
It is.
And to think, now it's a completely different, playing field when we can reach and weaponize for the kingdom people, regardless of where they live, big city or rural cities. And so it's very exciting.
So you got a brand new podcast with your wife, Jenny, called Hey, It's the Luskos. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and why you started it, what it's about? I'm just fascinated.
Well, Jenny and I always have kind of had in the back of our minds the idea of just a complete freeform podcast. So we don't really have a script. We just completely kind of just talk what we're going through, what we're learning, what we're seeing. We may pull in some content here and there that we hope would be, kind of in at some point in the podcast, something we bring up. Sometimes we get to the end of it, we never do. So it's been really fun just to talk marriage and hopefully let people in who have listened to us speak or read books we've written, but to hear it on a more, conversational, just here's what we're going through kind of a level.
Oh, that's neat. That's neat. And you've got a new resource coming out this summer too that I'd love for you to talk to leaders about in August. So sort of a book, sort of a journal, sort of a study. Can you tell us about it, Levi?
Yes. So when I wrote my first book, Through the Eyes of a Lion, it was all about grief. And then my third book was all about emotional intelligence and self-management. And long story short, I had taken a test that would supposedly tell you your level of emotional intelligence, and I didn't do nearly as well as I thought I would. And I was kind of crestfallen. So that led me to a several-year journey to improve it, because it said if you take 6 months, you can take the test again and see how you do. And I worked hard on some of the things that I was low, my points that were low in. And by the end of it, I brought my score up dramatically. And that particular study that motivated me was the statistic is 57% of success in any endeavor comes down to emotional intelligence. And I thought, gosh, if I'm this weak, how much better could I be doing by shoring up this blind spot? That led to that 2-year long journey where I was working on the book working on myself. And then eventually all that I learned, I put into the book. So emotional intelligence and grief. My publisher approached me and said, we feel like those two messages really could lead to something that people who are going through hard things, but also wanting to better themselves, it could be a way to take those messages deeper. So we kind of came up with this book. It's called Take Back Your Life. It's a 40-day interactive journey to thinking right so you can live right. And what it does is it takes you through content that is among the most salient truths expressed in the books, but then also questions to take it further, prayers to pray. There's space for meditation. There's a section called Breathe, Think, and Live, just because of how powerful it is to slow down and breathe, and then think, and then act. And so it's hardcover. I've never been published in hardcover. It has a ribbon, which I love books really with cool. ribbons, because then you can save your place from yesterday. So anyhow, that comes out. Well,
by the time this airs, it'll be out.
August 4th.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And what are you and Jenny learning about? Because she's an author now. She's got her own book. So you're doing podcasts together. She's very involved in the pastoring of your church. And now you're both authors, published authors. What are you learning about being two creatives, being married, raising a family, in leadership together?
Well, we learned that not both of us should be writing a book at the same time. We learned that.
Good lesson.
There's only room in a house for one tortured artist. So we learned that the hard way. But we also, I'm in awe of her. My wife is an incredible leader. She's got such a gentle spirit. So she's been just stepping into a new space. And it's been tremendous for me to watch that happen. She took a series at our church and preached for a whole series, which she had never done before. She had done the, odd Sunday here, Mother's Day, or, whatever. But she did 4 messages back to back to back. And after the first message, she broke her ankle. So she did a month of Sundays while leading, while parenting, while dealing with all the normal things, but also in a boot with crutches. And so, but it was incredible to watch her spirit shine in such difficult circumstances.
Oh, that's awesome. And that is a great lesson for any aspiring creatives. Do not both write a book at the same time. We have attempted that as well. And I think not having kids at home is a good remedy for that. But man.
But almost, when you're writing and you get done with the day writing, you almost want to be able to come back, like almost as though you're walking away from the typewriter and have your spouse be like, here's some tea, you got this, you did a great job. But when the other one's, doing the same thing and you're both needing that emotional energy to come from each other, like almost like, oh, you made it through a day writing. Good job, honey. Like I think it's better to alternate releases a little bit.
I think that's a really good idea. So publishers take note. Levi, it's always a joy to talk to you and to talk to Jenny. I want to thank you so much for encouraging leaders. If people want to find sort of the central hub for you online, where's the best place to send them? What website?
I don't even know that question. I think probably Fresh Life Church, or I think I do have a website somewhere.
And you're a great follow on Instagram too. So,
controversial these days, but here's what it is.
Hey, Levi, really appreciate you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Carey.
Well, I hope today's episode was helpful to you. You can always get more by subscribing to my channel. I also have a lot more content over at CareyNieuwhof.com for leaders in business and leaders in churches. And you can get transcripts of this episode there and so much more, plus some other stuff I do for leaders. So head on over there to discover more at CareyNieuwhof.com. And in the meantime, I really hope our time together today has helped you lead like never before.